Hey guys, it's Busta here. So this is just a little reminder to anyone who may not know that you can now find exclusive horror story videos on Twitch, where I also live stream Monday to Friday each day. If you would like to join in on the live streaming action, or just wish to listen to more stories, just hit the link in the description below and follow me on Twitch. I hope you all enjoy this week's videos, and without further ado, let's begin. When I was growing up, my dad was a single parent who worked long hours, and all his family lived back in Ireland. As a result, during the summer holidays, my brother and I were pretty much left to our own devices, even when I was 7 and he was 13. This got us into a few scrapes down the years, but one that really freaks me out to this day is Greaves Hall. If I remember correctly, Greaves Hall used to be an asylum, but has been burned down a few times and lain derelict for the last few decades. It was also one of the very few points of interest in Banks, during the short period of time in which we lived there anyway. Last I saw of it, they were building a new housing estate there, so hopefully they pulled it down, but I have not been to Banks for years. As I'm sure you'd expect, the site has a reputation as being haunted. Anyway, one day, when England was experiencing its annual 2 weeks of summer, my brother and his mates decided to go down to Greaves Hall. Normally, it was to kick a football about, but we all knew that they were really going there to stare at the ruin and make up some arbitrary reason for why they all bitched out of going in. And being the bratty little sister, I was kind enough to point this out. Unfortunately though, Big Bro is also a twatty older brother, and basically called my bluff after I'd spent several minutes calling them fannies. So, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, I set off with them. We stopped by the corner shop for some 90s approved levels of surgery snack food, and one of my brother's mates slipped the guy some cash for some massive bottles of White Lightning from some fags. This made me very excited because I was convinced I was going to get drunk and become really good at pool. My dad used to tell me the story of how he'd win pool games when he had a few pints. In hindsight, the stories were very similar to Popeye, but with rampant alcoholism instead of spinach. Anyway, so we walked into the hall. It was my brother, his 5 friends, and me tagging along at the back. I tried to be involved in the conversation, but they maintained it was for adults only, and went on talking about She-Ra's boobs. Honestly, I think they were starting to regret bringing me. Things settled down once we got onto the grounds. We had a 30-minute kickabout, during which I bagged a hat-trick, in hindsight entirely due to my brother's threats to better anyone who tried to tackle me. After the game, we poked around the grounds. There were loads of old buildings around the main hall, in various states of disrepair of course. One of my brother's friends got very interested in a tag someone had left on one of the walls of what looked like a barn or a depot or something. It was hard to tell what its original purpose had been. We stopped by the water tower, where Big Bro managed to hook a used condom on the end of a stick and chased everyone around with it. Next came an E-number, an alcohol-laden lunch. I wasn't allowed any booze of course, so no sick pool skills were required. And then, just as the heat of the day passed, we found ourselves with nothing left to do but head into the main hall. "Go on then," Big Bro said, nodding towards the building. "After you," I replied, proud of myself. I'd been working on that one all afternoon. Having mugged Big Bro right off, I let them lead the way with a shamble to his step and Dutch courage in his heart. The rest of us filed in behind. To be honest, the hall itself was disappointing. It looks very scary from the outside, crumbling away and fire damaged, with foliage overgrowing the outside of the building. Most of the windows were long smashed, leaving these gaping black spaces, even on a sunny day. Inside, though, it was just a building, kind of like any building that age. You could tell it had been grand once, but now the paint was crumbling and the floors were peeling up. My brother and his friends got bored of poking around the ground floor quickly. They went up the rotten staircases one at a time, but I was confined to the ground floor. This might sound like my brother being protective, but he's used me to test similar staircases in the past. So I think he just wanted rid of me. Anyway, my dad always bollocks me if I don't do as my big bro says, so I kicked my heels downstairs for a while. There was a big room which I think might have been the canteen once, but even now you could tell it had been posh. It had tile floors and such. So I passed some time twirling around pretending to be a ballerina. The others must have found something though, because they were gone for a while, so I eventually got bored and went back to exploring. I was just investigating a particularly gnarly looking black fungus growing out of the walls when I saw that one of the doors that was either locked or swollen shut had a hole in it, just wide enough for a scrawny 7-year-old too. With the minimum of grunting and no concept of tetanus risk I was running, I managed to scrape my way past the door into a mouldy smelling room with a sluice and a load of cleaning equipment. There were a lot of brown pellets on the floor, which I now realize were rat droppings. The ceiling was partly collapsed in one corner as well, so naturally I decided it would be totally safe to climb onto an old basin, then a locker, and scramble up the wall until I could pull myself onto the next floor. I was quite pleased with myself at this point, lying on the damp floorboards in a room that was empty, other than an overturned bed. I pretty much jumped straight up when I heard my brother and his friends laughing, already hatching plans of how I could fuck with them in this haunted asylum. But then I saw something outside of the window. There was a man, dressed in a black overcoat and a hat, standing just inside of the tree line of the woods. It's hard to judge heights when you're a runty little girl standing on the first floor, but he looked well over 6 feet tall and wide. I remember that vividly. He wasn't fat per se, but he was incredibly broad-shouldered. Looking back, I assume he was a homeless guy or something. But he looked neater than a homeless man, and his posture didn't strike me as that of someone living on the street. He stood up straight, staring through the empty window into the room where I could hear my brother and his friends laughing. Being chronically thick, I pretty much ignored this dude, under the cast-iron logic that he wasn't supposed to be here. Because if he was, he'd be wearing a high-vis jacket. I went back to looking around the room, and that's when I saw the stuff. It had been hidden when I was on the floor, behind the rusted bed frame. But now as I walked over to it, I saw and smelled the signs of someone living there. There was a sleeping bag that smelled bad enough to make me gag, a few scraps of newspaper, a tow rope, a tangled heap of clothes, and beside it all, a big mean-looking fucker of a knife. I remember pondering to myself whether it was a sword or a knife at that size, and looking back, I think the blade must have been a good 18 inches. It was covered in a black oily substance, and what looked like crusted blood. I was reaching down to pick it up, because no sense of self-preservation, when I remembered the dude in the tree line. I froze, doing the arithmetic needed to work out just how thoroughly fucked I might be. That sort of turned into a paralysis of indecision and fear that rooted me to the spot for a full minute. And then I heard the sound of feet scraping against stone at the bottom of the window by my head. As is my default response, I turned tail and ran right out of that room, along a molded hallway and into the room where my brother was. "I want to go home." "How did you get up here?" He was going to take too long to agree. I knew it, especially if I told him about the man. And at that point, I was absolutely convinced that this big bear of a guy was going to come and gut us with that knife any minute. So I tried a different tactic. "I want to go home now," I said, looking down at my feet. It was a look I'd perfected after years of asking him to sleep in his bed if we watched a scary film. "Who's the fanny now, Sam?" my brother's fat friend, who we'll refer to as Heinous Bellin, said. "Belt up, she's just a kid," Big Bro replied. Normally, I would have gone into full brat mode at that comment, but I was desperate to leave, so I let it slide. I pretty much dragged him out of that place, even if Heinous Bellin took his sweet time getting down the stairs. As we got outside, I grabbed a bottle of White Lightning from Big Bro and took off towards the entrance, boasting about how I was going to give it to Dad. It had the desired effect of getting them all to leave as fast as their legs could carry them. I tried not to look back because I knew I'd piss my pants if I saw the man. But as we rounded the corner, leading back to the street, I just couldn't help myself. Truthfully, I don't know if I saw him. All I could see was that big scary building with its pitch black windows. And honestly, he could have been in any one of them. I'm gonna have to preface this with a few things. This encounter is second-hand, but was told to me on multiple occasions by the person that experienced it. I am a natural skeptic and cynic, so I can't say that I 100% believe it, but his telling of it was pretty simple yet concise, and didn't vary between retellings. I've also known this guy for many years, and his advice and input on just about everything is well-reasoned. And he's always helpful, so I guess I'll just take his word on it, even if it's with a grain of salt. Also keep in mind that I am not a seasoned writer, and past and present tense may get a little jumbled, but I'll keep it clear and accurate as best as I can. Alright, so let's get down to business. My friend, we'll call him Marv, likes to go solitary camping on occasion to be one with nature and the things that go along with that. He's also an avid gun collector and enthusiast. I don't remember exactly when he said this took place, but it was a few years back, and he decided to go camping on a whim. He packed his gear, a few guns, hunting rifle, and a .45 sidearm specifically, and headed out into the country onto a vast swatch of a property owned by a friend of his. He did have full permission in the works. This happened close to Cosachi National Forest in south-central Louisiana. I won't be any more specific other than that, so we can maintain anonymity. Safe to say, though, it's miles and miles of forest and wilderness. He liked to hike in pretty deep, and camp at a specific spot he found a few trips prior. These details are kind of sparse, as it's not really the meat and potatoes to this encounter. So, he made his way in, and set up a camp in his usual small clearing for the night. Skipping ahead a few hours, it was now late afternoon when he heard leaves crunching and twigs being stepped on. He assumed that it was just an animal at first, and got up from cooking something on the fire to try and get a look. He gazed in the direction of the noise and saw a man approaching through the trees, a good many yards away. He has described his etiquette for dealing with other people in very remote places as always being cautious, as more often than not, people he comes across are armed like him. He tries to stay as friendly as possible, but still keeps his guard up, looking for any ulterior motives, as you never can tell what some folks are up to out in the middle of nowhere. He'll make chit-chat with them, find out generally what they're up to if he can, and occasionally share a meal, etc. He's never really met anyone nefarious as of yet, other than this situation, and maybe one other, but that's a whole nother ordeal. So one thing that sets off a small alarm bell for him is he knows he's the only one with permission to be on this property, and secondly, this guy is not dressed for the location at all. He said the guy was wearing a white t-shirt, shore blue jogging shorts, and white socks and sneakers. Mind you, Marv is miles out in the middle of the woods, away from any paths, roadways, houses, or anything really. Nobody is going to casually stroll into his current location, dressed like that, unless they are lost or confused. It was nearly fall, but not quite cool, very normal for Louisiana, so there's a lot of mosquitoes, ticks, and other insects. You're not going to have most of your skin exposed if you can help it deep in the woods. I know that all too well from personal experience myself. So Marv assumes something might be up and calls out, "Hey there, do you need any help or anything?" He said it pretty loud, in fact, definitely loud enough to be heard. But the guy just keeps walking forward, staring directly at him. Marv is starting to get unnerved, and as I said, I know this guy well. and he's as cool as a cucumber in a tense situation. Getting more uneasy, as the guy is closing the distance, he gets to his feet and loudly declares, "Hey man, can I help you with something or what?" The guy is 50 to 20 feet away from Marv, now standing at the edge of the clearing in the forest. The guy is looking at Marv, dead in the eye, and speaks and clearly says, "Help me." Marv said that he was already starting to actually get worried at this point because he said that the way the guy said it was as if something that didn't know exactly how to talk was saying "help me," or at least that's what he first thought. It just didn't sound right. The guy, still unmoving, says "help me" again, slightly more emphatic. Marv said that this is when he picked up on what was truly wrong about this. He said that the tone of the voice was more female and actually sounded like a recording being played back, and that the guy's lip and mouth movements weren't matching up with the phrase. It was like he was opening his mouth, emitting the phrase, and closing it again. Marv asked, "What do you need help with?" Not daring to back up or move whatsoever. The guy, still standing motionless, as well as still looking directly at him, said, "Help me," again, and repeated the phrase another 3 times, slowly, but not louder in volume. Marv, now totally unsure of what the hell is going on, interrupts the guy by barking, "Alright, you need to fucking go now, unless you actually need my help. Do you need my help or not?" The guy didn't miss a beat, and started up with the "help me's" again, and made as if to take another step in Marv's direction. Marv told me that he then did the only thing that made sense in the moment, and drew his .45 semi-auto pistol and pointed it at the guy, telling him again, "Listen, you need to fucking go. I don't care what you want." The guy starts to get more animated and agitated, actually starting to say the phrase louder now, over and over, but not stepping closer or backing away. Marv did what he thought was right, given his current predicament, assuming that he was dealing with an unstable or potentially dangerous individual, and discharged a round into the ground in front of the guy. Now this is where it gets full batshit crazy. As the guy stops uttering the phrase, he goes silent, and still staring at Marv, full-on backflips and somersaults, like a gymnast would, backwards into the woods and immediately out of sight. Yeah, you heard that right. Now, I know what you're thinking because I had and still have the same reaction. That sounds like bullshit for sure, but Marv gave no indication of falsehood, and told me this multiple times, each time in dead serious demeanor. Yet, Marv said that the guy backflipped away effortlessly, as if pulled back by an unseen tension coil or something. He described it as completely unnatural and totally out of place. The guy had just appeared and repeated the same phrase over and over, eventually becoming almost frantic before Marv shot at the ground before him, causing him to flee. Marv said that he stood there, focused on the forest where the guy just flipped into, and saw and heard no further movement. It was like the guy had never even been there. He stayed like this as the sun began to set and the normal night noises crept in. As I mentioned before, Marv is a pretty unshakable fellow, and actually stayed in the area for the night and the next night before returning with no further incident. When he told me and some other friends about this, of course, we asked him many questions. We asked him to elaborate on the guy's speech sounds. He said that the more he thought about it after the incident, the more sure he was that it was definitely a female's voice coming from the guy. It was like he or it had heard someone say this and mimicked it like a parrot or other talking bird would. Almost like a lure. He doesn't know what it wanted, and it, and yes, I'm calling it an it, didn't give any indication to follow or utter anything else. It reacted immediately to the gunshot, and you know what followed there. He has been back to the property since, with no other strange occurrences. The only other minute detail that I can think of is he did remember hearing during the early morning of the first night what sounded like a gunshot off in the distance, and it did sound eerily similar to his .45. He thought he may have heard it again on the hike back out too. There are people that hunt in the area, of course, and it could have just been that, but he couldn't be sure. Since this incident, he did some online research of the whole area and found many legends, stories, and supposed encounters dealing with skinwalkers and other unnerving bits of Native American folklore in the area. Not to mention mimics and the other similar supposed creatures out there. A lot of this encounter lines up with these tales, but there's nothing tangible to prove it, of course. But even as a skeptic, it does make me wonder about strange things in the remote and untouched areas of our world that can't be explained. So, I can attempt to answer questions about this, but I'm only going off of what I was told, so keep that in mind. And I can potentially ask Marv about the ones I can't answer myself, as I should be hanging out with him again in a few days.